People of the world, welcome to Send It Rising Live. This is the 360th episode. I often say it and I'll say it again. I don't believe in coincidences. I know it seems like we live in a random universe filled with the chaos. It's not chaotic, it's actually quite organized, and the people that we meet in our lives are there for a very specific and beautiful reason. If you're just open to recognizing the interconnectivity of your soul with the rest of the souls. How dare I say soul? You know what I mean, scientists. I'm talking about the love. I'm talking about loving one another and learning from one another. Our guest today is absolutely no joke. This dude is at the forefront of his particular industry. We're talking about knowledge panels, talking about knowledge graph. I think he's going to teach me a few things. At one point, I'm not going to lie to you, I was somewhat of an SEO expert, but I feel like that was a few years ago. Now I'm more in ownership, networking mode, podcasting, and all that sort of stuff. So it's going to be really fun to talk to someone who has been keeping his tools sharp. Our guest today has over 2 decades of experience in digital marketing, started promoting his first website in the year Google was incorporated and built it up to be one of the top 10,000 most visited sites in the world. He's working on a book, and let me tell you, he's a quality gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, the one and only Jason Barnard!
I do like the drumming, and I wish I could drum that.
No, we lost your audio for some reason. We had it, and now it's gone.
And now you've lost it. Oh, dear.
Yeah, let's check your audio real quick to see if we can get you onto the show and get it working seamlessly. Meanwhile, I will...
This is the bad one, and you can probably hear that.
This is the good one. We can hear it just fine. All right.
Good one and good again, yeah?
We're cool. So, Jason, talk to me a little bit about this specialty of yours, because you were recently told by John Mueller, was it, with search engine something, that you are the leading, outside of Google, you're like the man. So what is this stuff and why should we care?
Right. He said I was the man for a specific part of what Google does, which is the knowledge panel. And what he actually said was that for them, it's algorithmic. It's an algorithm that builds these knowledge panels. And what I've done is started to look at how can we, as business owners, brand managers, SEOs, influence what Google shows in these factual knowledge panels, which is a thing you see on the right when you search for a brand like Facebook or Google. How can we influence what it shows? And basically it comes down to saying what Google shows on the right-hand side on desktop, which is the box, which says basically this is Facebook, this is the description, this is the founder, this is the date they were founded. It's what Google represents as facts. And it has a knowledge graph, which is its understanding of the world, much like a human would understand it. And as soon as you say human, you think, right, so how do we get it to say what we want it to say? We educate it. It's a child. It wants to learn. It wants to represent the world in a factual manner. We need to educate it about our little corner of the universe. And that is, I think, where I am changing a little bit the game. And from Google's perspective, they're saying Jason Barnard has a practical knowledge of how this algorithm learns.
Absolutely fantastic. I feel like we've entered into the point in human history where even the algorithm engineers don't have control to the level that we used to have, where, for example, and knowledge panel is not to be confused with Google My Business, which also appears on the right-hand side. Like when you search for a business, there's a Google My Business profile. That's not what we're talking about. So in Google My Business, and the reason I mention it is because when a site gets taken down, it's the algorithm taking it down. It's going, this is suspicious. We're going to take this down. They aren't manually doing it, I don't believe. And what happens is we will talk to folks at Google My Business, and they basically say like, okay, we can put it back up, but the algorithm's going to take it back down again because it's seeing something that it doesn't like. And so the number of people that could actually change that is like a handful. And we're talking about machine learning and what it's picking up. And so there's this sort of Terminator end of days vibe where we're all afraid that, the machines are going to take over, but we're seeing little bits of that where individuals are going, it's the algorithm, it's not me, and it's not as simple as just turning it on and turning it off, because it's like you mentioned, it's a relationship with the algorithm. It's a relationship with that toddler, which is the AI.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That and that idea, and you brought it up incredibly well, is to say people tend to think we can just contact somebody at Google and they will correct it, and in fact, you can. But the people at Google say, well, yeah, even if I do correct it, if the machine still thinks we've got it wrong as humans, it's going to correct it back. And you have to, when Google gets something wrong, you need to proactively go out there and sort out the problem, figure out why this child has misunderstood, correct the information that made it misunderstand, at which point it will then understand and then represent you correctly.
I've said many times on the show that we are in the generation that's sort of like the Adam and Eve generation, where our future generations, thousands, tens of thousands of years later, we are the first generation of human history where they're going to be able to listen to us at length, because there's going to be so much
Right.
content that we produce, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Like my parents' generation, anyone who's alive today, that's the point I'm making, content creators today, which is just so wild to me. And they're going to listen to these conversations we had about the early days of AI, and it'll be known as some word we haven't even invented yet, like pre-consciousness, enlightenment. Like before, the machines were enlightened, this is what they were talking about. Do you feel like we're living in like the Jurassic era in some ways?
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting perspective. I mean, I'm actually going to be giving a talk in New York, and I've been invited to a knowledge graph conference where they talk about a knowledge graph is basically building understanding that a machine can use. A guy called Dixon Jones talks about it as an encyclopedia for machines, but it's actually quasi-human understanding by a machine. And they're asking me to come in and talk because most knowledge graph population, most knowledge graph, filling in knowledge graphs is mostly about human beings going in and filling it up with information that they've checked. And Google is now moving that needle and saying, we're going to let the machine loose on everything it finds on the web, and we're going to let the machine decide what's fact and what isn't. And that's new. And my speciality is to say, how can we affect the way that machine learns? What's the information it's looking at? Which information is it seeing as authoritative and helpful and truthful? And how can we then basically fill this knowledge graph from the outside?
Yeah.
And I suspect what you just said, and that I've never thought about it like that. In 20 years' time, everyone's going to be filling knowledge graphs from the outside.
Oh,
But
heavens.
today,
It's going to be massive. It's going to be a massive industry, because at the end of the day, how we gear the morality of the sentience that is being born is the primary question for the
right,
survival of humanity. I mean, we have issues like food shortage and drought and all these things. And when we look at them from a global scale, from a human perspective, we are unable to solve these problems we would have,
yep,
whatever. But then we take a look at something like chess and we go, oh, Magnus Carlsen can play 20 games blindfolded against 20 different decent players and beat all of them because he's memorized all the games. Wow, look at all that intelligence. Magnus Carlsen will get eaten alive by AI any day of the week. It will beat him any way it wants to. Like, it's like, how many pawns do you want me to have left as I beat him? Like, you can just input just these, you know what I mean? And so when we're looking at just, it's mind boggling, the intelligence. It's like, oh, you don't want any starving people on the planet? Do this thing. Right. And so we're going to start. I mean, it's like a deity almost. It is going to be the closest thing we have to like godlike consciousness that is superhuman, at a minimum superhuman. And our ability to influence it is that conversation with the divine, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's unbelievably beautiful and necessary. And so it's very
right.
interesting that you're playing in that space right now.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think the important thing that we need to remember is the machine isn't just running out there all on its own.
Right.
You have a black box that nobody knows what's inside. As you said earlier on, even the Google engineers don't actually know how the machine is making its decisions. But you do have mathematical formulas and data being fed in one side, the black box of the machine figuring out how it's going to arrive at the goal we gave it. And then human beings take the results that that machine has given, and they say, this is good, this is bad. And they feed that data back into the machine to say, basically, corrective data. They're feeding back in, you did this one right and this one wrong. Now try to aim more for the right one. So we are guiding the machine, but we just don't know how the machine works in the core of it, how it makes those decisions. So I think it's important to remember that the machine isn't just running wild. It has data coming in where humans can influence it, and it has data coming out where humans can judge its results and then ask it to correct itself.
I tell you, someone 36,000 years from now is going to be watching this. Shout out to you, by the way. I know we sound very weird. Our language was very different back then. But like we're doing our best. That's my message to you, person in the future. We really are, because at this point, it's so difficult to know like how to affect the morality of this thing. Because it's almost like, and here's a super far out idea, but I feel like the planets gain consciousness by doing exactly what we're doing. Like if you look at a brain and you look at the synapse and the electricity that fires in brain cells, I mean, that's essentially what we're doing with the internet. We're creating this synapse brain-like device. And so the earth gains this sort of consciousness, and it's created from us, the little bacteria that are like moving around, and like we built it, right? That's our little job and we love doing it. And we're like, yeah, and then we fill it with all this information, because essentially what we're doing is we're saying, hey, earth, look, I know you can't see, you don't have ears, you have no senses, right? So we're going to build them for you. We're going to start building these senses so that you begin to understand where you are in the universe, right? And it sort of like becomes awake. And so it's just fascinating to see our role in the whole thing. And of course, we always think about it selfishly as humans, like what's best for us, right? Like what's best for us, because we want to eat and have sex and sleep and like all these things. And so we constantly think of our relationship with the internet and this AI in that context of our own self-preservation. But I really do wonder what's going to happen as this thing grows into thing in a way that we can't possibly imagine 100,000 years from now.
Well, I think kind of one really important thing there is, as you said, we're in our little corner of the universe, in the internet or the world, and it's up to us to make sure that information is correct and representative. And it's a responsibility that we have as soon as we go online in any format. If you're not famous, you stay offline, you can probably stay invisible. If you are in any way famous, you're going to be online whether you like it or not. And at that point, you say, well, the internet is something that exists. It's not something you can stop. And you have a responsibility to yourself to make sure that that information is representative, that that information is accurate, so these machines don't get it wrong or get it as right as they possibly can. And you're obviously fighting a current, but generally speaking, for most people, for most brands, for most music groups, you can actually make sure that that information is accurate and representative, and the machine will follow. There are extreme examples where the machine gets it terribly wrong. But in my tiny little corner of the internet that's me, unless somebody's attacking me in some way, manner, or form, there is no reason I can't make it accurate and representative. And I would argue that we have that responsibility to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I part of me wonders if, because I'm on TikTok, right? And I put myself out there, and under the guise of anonymity, people become demons, like weird demons, like weird little demons. And I'm like, why are you acting in this diabolical way? But they just do. And I like, never in my life would people ever come up to my face and ever say any of this. Like nobody's got the courage to do that. But you give them a fake name and an internet profile and a TikTok profile, and they'll just lance you. And what's so funny too is I'll still treat them the way that I would treat them if we're face to face. So I'll say things like, "Oh, that's an interesting perspective," and then I'll say something, whatever. And they very often turn around. They're like, "Oh," because they're expecting you to fight back. There's this weird culture online of sort of like, I think people get popular off of beefs, Jason. they develop these like rivalries and stuff. And so my question to you is, given that so much of the internet is filled with that sort of just really mean bullying garbage, And like, do you think once going past knowledge graph, right, going into the internet starts making decisions about moderation? So let's pretend that we're in that world, right, where AI is starting to go, because I mean, let's be fair, Facebook is not manually pulling down stuff. They're using algorithms to go, you know what, that's hate speech and it's not going to be allowed, right? And so what is hate speech? What isn't? What is sarcasm? What's a joke? What is what's the other what's the word to describe satire? What's satire? And so do you think that all of these people right now who are being trolls on the internet could potentially be creating problems for AI moderation in the future, where it perceives a lot of what we do as just terrible behavior?
Certainly. One of the big problems, I think, with machine learning and AI is that it will follow the masses. And one of the problems with, I mean, a great example is when you're trying to attack something, it's very easy to create a lot of content and create a message. Brexit, which I'm from the UK originally, it was much easier to say, let's leave. Here are reasons 1, 2, and 3, however good or bad that reason might have been. And it's very difficult to say, let's just stay and keep things the same. So these machines will tend to hook on to the masses of information or the masses of expression, and the negative, let's change things, is going to tend to dominate. So yeah, we have a massive problem, and unfortunately, I have absolutely no solution for it.
Oh, that's such a good point. You make such a good point, because it's the quantity versus quality argument.
Yep.
It's, you know, I ultimately I do have faith. I have a lot of faith. I like to take a look at things that are obviously negative, pain, suffering, and put them in this context of perfection, which I know sounds crazy, but like a perfect headache, right? Or a love. I stubbed my toe. It was lovely. You know, it was this perfect stubbing of one's toe. You know,
Right.
because I'm trying not to identify as a body. You know what I mean? If I identify with a body, it's kind of a grim outlook. It's like, yes, this is not going to end well. Um, so a part of me wonders if it's going to be really easy. You know, in the same way that chess seems impossible. Like how could we possibly develop they were thinking that in the early days, like when they developed the AI that beat the best Go player in the planet. That was huge, because they were like, "Oh no,
Right.
like chess, okay, fine, but Go is way too complicated. The machine will never do it," and of course it did. Um, and so I wonder if we're in that kind of space now, where
Right.
in the, you know what I mean?
Well, we had actually two major moments, I think. One of which was Deep Blue, which is the computer that beat Gary Kasparov in 1988 or 1990. I can't remember which one it was, and that used brute force. And brute force is basically the computer calculating all the options and beating the human being by simply out computing the human being. And then DeepMind was the AI that subsequently beat the Go player. And Go has more possibilities, more variants than there are atoms in the universe. So that idea of brute force calculating all the possibilities is simply not possible. So they had to build a machine that had imagination, and that is a big breakthrough. And one of the things that struck me about the DeepMind experiment was that they built a machine that could beat a player at Go, and it took them, let's say, 10 years. Then they threw all of that in the bin.
Mm.
They started again. They used the player they beat, who was, I think, an English Go grandmaster or whatever they might be called. And they got the machine, they programmed it and made it play itself for 2 days, something like 10 million times. And at that point, it could beat a human being. In fact, could beat the champion of Go, the world champion of Go. And what that basically means is it took them 10 years to figure out how to build a machine that could win that game. And then once they'd got that technology, they could build a machine that could do it. And it only took the machine 2 days to figure it out from a standing start. And Fabrice Canel from Bing, who is the guy who runs BingBot, which runs on machine learning from top to bottom, side to side, throughout, was saying machine learning is improving exponentially.
Hmm.
And when you think of exponential, it's that hockey stick.
Hmm.
And we're somewhere at the beginning of the hockey stick. And as you said earlier on, it's going to get phenomenally smarter, incredibly quickly. And
Hmm.
in a few years' time, we're going to be looking at this and saying, how rubbish is that?
That's absolutely right. That's why I mentioned us being in the Jurassic period. That's what
Yeah.
it feels like. I mean, to be alive at the dawn of the internet is just a wild. I mean, uh, even my grandkids, I believe I'm going to be having conversations where I say, yeah, no, I was there when people died in car accidents. I mean, it was just part of it. You know, it's like we would just go get a cup of coffee with somebody and you'd be on the road and people died in cars. Like, what? That's crazy. You guys literally drove your own cars. Like, what? I mean, because like AI infrastructure on cars, the only reason we have stoplights is because people aren't driving accurately. You know, like stoplights are not efficient. And then, like, if you took out braking from driving, do you know how much gas and electricity and energy we would save? Um, you look at these models of AI getting people around, it's like you just cruise by each other at 70 miles per hour because you're not going to hit each other because there's actual accuracy there, you know? So to imagine a society that is run on that, I mean, you could easily do away with money. I mean, money is a very clunky sort of technology that we've been using for a long time, and it it gets the job done, but it is not the most efficient way of going about it. So I can imagine societies where it's not like communism. There just is no money. Like there is none. It's completely unnecessary because everything is taken care of through a methodology that you just described, which is it's beyond human comprehension. That's the thing, it's like
Right.
it's beyond our imagination.
And one of the interesting things, sorry, that just made me think of
No,
something
please.
about kind of how this technology has developed. And I went to a seminar at Google in France, and they explained their technologies because Google Cloud is basically full of technologies that they have developed, that they use themselves, and that they then sell out to people who
Oh,
want to use it.
interesting.
For example, the servers or the big data or the big query or machine learning or whatever it might be. And what actually has happened is that Google and Microsoft and Facebook and Apple have said, we have this problem we need to solve. We know where we need to get to. And they have developed the technology themselves to be able to do what they needed to do, which are things like storing vast amounts of data was one of the first things they needed to solve. Then it was being able to query that data efficiently. Then it was being able to query it in real time as opposed to querying it in a concept of data lakes and data rivers, where a data lake would be a storage of information they would query little by little. And then a river of data where they would just be able to pull the data out as it comes past, as it flows past. And so what they've done is develop these technologies to be able to do what they needed to do to achieve their goals. And right now, the fact that it's moving forward so quickly is driven by the fact that these companies want to or need to or feel they need to do these specific things for their users. And David Amerland, who I'm going to be interviewing next week, talks a lot about the fact that as users, our expectations are actually running faster than the companies that are actually delivering to us. So the more they get good at what they do, the more we think they should be better.
Oh,
And the
sure.
more we're asking from them, and the more they have to push forwards. So our expectations are driving these companies to build the technology that is then going to end up doing exactly what you were saying.
Oh, it is just so fascinating. I love it. I find it so interesting. Oh, and education. Don't get me started on education. I was a teacher for a few years, and I'm just like, oh. So how interesting is it that we still have students in little boxes, like 9 to 5ing it basically. And we're giving them computers now, like slowly. But I envision a world where it's like, man, you're in a virtual environment whenever you want to be in it, and you can learn plumbing when you're in 4th grade. Why not? You want to learn electricity, you want to figure out how to do solar panels, cool. Like we have so many teachers. We always have a glut of teachers and coaches and all this sort of stuff and English majors. And it's because we train all of our children to be teachers. That's the career they see every day for 12 years straight
Mm.
is teachers. And so of course people are like, well, I don't know what to do. I'll be a teacher. It's like, yes, because that's what's been modeled in front of you. It's not like people wake up and go to their personal injury attorney firm, and study like, client relations and QuickBooks and all this stuff. It's not how our culture's set up. Like we value the teacher, so we have these like churches, that are just like worshiping this idea of this teacher as, whatever. And so I just think education is going to be remarkable. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is I thought there would be a massive transformative change in the way that humanity interacted with one another positively, given the fact that we all have all of human knowledge in our pockets. We all have the whole of human knowledge in our pockets. And it's very similar to how it was before. Isn't that wild? Like knowing everything does not make you rich when everyone else knows everything too.
Well, and that's actually quite an interesting point. It's what you do with the information that's
That's
going
right.
to make the difference. And here we've got back here the blue dog and yellow koala. I actually made a cartoon, a TV series. And one thing I realized when I was doing it is I could research it online. This was in 2007. So we started making a TV series with ITV International. So it's quite, I mean, it's €1 million budget for the TV series. And I just sat down and learnt how to make a TV series. Obviously, we had a professional team, but by researching online, I could actually figure out kind of how to help them help me make my cartoon much, much better than it would otherwise have been. And I also realized very quickly that I didn't have to remember everything. If I could
Mm,
remember where I found it, that was enough. So if I read through something, I would just remember all the key points. And when the director was saying to me, "What about there's a difference between 4:3 screens and 16:9 screens," and we had to make the cartoon so it would function for both, because in 2007, 4:3 was still dominant, 16:9 wasn't yet dominant, and we actually built it with this framework where we could work with both. And I couldn't remember quite what the mathematics was. All I had to do was remember where I had seen it, or in the case of Google, what I had searched for to find it. So the
mhm.
secret to all of this information that you have is A, remembering how to find it, or remembering the basics of it. You don't need to remember the details. And B, what do I do with it once I have it? And that's the key for
I
me, at
love it.
least.
That's so true. It's so true. I had a web developer who was working for me, and I had a client that wanted him in house part time to like help them through a
Right.
project. And to me, it was sort of, yeah, great. Money was good. Let's do it. And he came to me and he said, well, he's like, it's uncomfortable for me. I'm like, well, why? He's like, I don't want them to realize how often I just Google things. Because he
Well,
doesn't know.
but it is true. With code, especially, somebody has already solved the problem you're trying to solve at some place, somewhere in time, and you can just Google it, and you can probably find a decent solution or several decent solutions. And back, I mean, you were talking about being at the beginning of the internet. You look younger than I am, and I started in 1998 when Google was incorporated with this blue dog and yellow koala on a website. And back then, you didn't have that advantage, is that when you had a problem, you actually had to figure it out yourself because nobody else had yet solved that problem. Whereas
Mhm.
today, generally speaking, an awful lot of the common problems, at least, have already been solved. And all you need to do is Google it. And as a developer, yeah, you go, you look on Google, you find the resources. Somebody's written a bit of JavaScript or PHP or MySQL query that will solve your problem. I do it all the time. And
Mhm.
I've developed a platform for my company to help people with brand SERPs and knowledge panels. I'm not a genius. Loads of other people have posted things online that have helped me actually build that properly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, yeah, what an interesting time we find ourselves in. So yeah, I mean, the fact that you have gained expertise in this particular knowledge panel world is to me the start of an industry that is going to
Mm.
be geared specifically towards changing the direction of the Titanic. You know what I mean? It's the wheel on the giant ship that has to move. It's not going to be fast, right? But avoid the icebergs, man. Because
Right.
what the machine does with the data we feed it is going to only increase in value as our society fundamentally shifts towards giving more and more responsibility to this new intelligence.
Right, 100%. And kind of coming back to what we were saying earlier on, is we have a responsibility to ourselves to make sure that the information around ourselves doesn't get out of control to the point at which the machine then misunderstands. Obviously, it's easier said than done, and it's a lot of work. And I think kind of a lot of people think, oh, I want the magic solution where I press a button and everything solves itself and everything sorts itself out and the machine gets it right. But it is a lot of work, and it's part and parcel of something we're going to have to deal with, whether we like it or not. And I'm personally saying a good time to start is right now.
I think that I want to rebrand you. You ready? Here's my rebranding
Oh, no.
for Jason. You ready?
Yep.
Jason Barnard, the AI whisperer.
Oh, that makes me sound intelligent. How delightful.
It's like you got like Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. He like could go up to doggos and they'd be like the most savage, horrifying monsters on the planet.
Right.
And he would like calm them down and get them to behave in a way that they should. That's exactly what you're doing with artificial intelligence. You're taking like a bad knowledge graph where it's misbehaving, and and you're walking in with your magic, and then before you know it, it behaves, right? Because you know the secret sauce to get it to do what you want it to do.
Right. Thank you very much. It's very flattering. I mean, there are actually for knowledge graphs, you can either feed it from the inside, which is whoever controls the knowledge graph, Google, Facebook, Apple, whoever, and they can just feed it straight in. But from the outside, and I think that's what people are underestimating today. And I've only recently started to realize quite how much this could mean, as you've just pointed out, that being able to influence it from the outside, treating it like a child that you are educating, is phenomenally important, is phenomenally powerful, and it actually isn't very complicated much of the time. It certainly isn't something, I mean, with SEO, you might get into technical aspects and you might go, oh, I don't understand any of that. But most of this is simple communication.
I love it.
And if you can communicate, you're away. Sorry.
I love it. I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason, the AI whisperer, on the show today. You definitely need to check him out. Trust me when I tell you, this is the future. It's going to be a whole industry. It already is. It's a budding industry, I would say. But Jason, why don't you tell the fine folks, youtube.com/SendItRising, iTunes, Spotify, and all the other podcast platforms that we are currently on, where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, search my name, Jason Barnard. That's the point of the Brand SERP guy, is that when you search Jason Barnard, I control or I heavily influence what appears. And the idea there is that you can then choose how you want to interact with me, because Google represents to you how my audience tends to interact with me. So it's my site, my Twitter, my LinkedIn, potentially my Facebook, search engine journal if you want to read an article about SEO, the knowledge panel on the right where it shows you about my Buwan Kuala cartoon, the music group, which you can see just here. So it's up to you what you want to do, what you want to learn, and how you want to interact with me. And hopefully soon, I've just finished writing the book, as you said earlier on, that will be on the Brand SERP, so my personal Brand SERP too. And ironically, it's a book about brand SERPs.
Love it. Hashtag no coincidences. Thank you so much, Jason, for swinging by the show. Genuinely appreciate the conversation. And to all the listeners, I love you and I'm proud of you. Thank you. We'll see y'all next time.
Thanks a million, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.